right, so we know that the pressure for this industry to decarbonize is heating up. What would you guys say is the silver bullet to decarbonizing this industry? What would be the most important solution? Let's start with you then, Kenneth.
Well, I think we heard from the previous panel as well, there's no silver bullet. So I think it's all about working together, trying out, making sure that what is most cost effective, what is most feasible at this time, and then work towards end goal of the net zero in 2050 with intermediate steps of 2030, 40. I think if that's the plan that we have set out, and together with the various ecosystem players, I think we can take steps towards it.
All right, so intermediate timelines, 2030 to 2050. So we're not going to go to 2060, yeah, for this panel. Paolo, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, I should have probably come here with my bowler suit today to just emphasize it's time for action. It's time for action. We need to test technologies. We need to try different type of fuels. And we need definitively to collaborate. Singing the same song of all the colleagues in the previous panel and what we are hearing, the collaboration is just paving the road, is minimizing risks for the one that are investing in novel technologies and new business models. Without that, it's very difficult to move on. But action now, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, so many are singing the same song, like they said. So Andrew, do you want to add on to the bridge of the song, maybe?
I think to add to that, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to recognize that industrial groups such as ourselves, a big mining group, actually is responsible for this climate catastrophe that we face today. So by deferring it to later, we are not doing our duty to the citizens of this planet. So we have to act now. As Paolo says, spending a lot of time in his boiler suit, me too recently, doing something quite interesting down the road, which I'll probably talk about later. But I think acting now is absolutely critical. But I think the silver bullet is also the fact that there are fuels there today which can be used, a little bit more effort, but again, acting now can make sure that those can become commercialized as quickly as possible to stop the catastrophe.
Nice, thank you, Andrew. Cristina.
Yeah, we are very much aligned, I think, all of us. So it's about acting now, but it's also about taking into account the solutions that we have today, like, for example, energy efficiency, right? And now we have Paolo and Berge Bulk doing great things. I'm sure he will talk about it later. But there are things that you can do today, actually. So that's extremely important, I think, building your strategy for your whole fleet and also building flexibility. That would help us for the future.
Flexibility. Thank you, Cristina. Dr. Sanjay.
For me, I think it's a paradigm shift in our mindsets in three areas. One thing is we need to change our mindsets around return on investment as the sole driver for change. We need to start thinking about return on the environment as well. The second mindset change is the virtue of being a realist is limited. It should not make us feel that, because it's so hard, we should take our time. Time is not on our side. If you believe the IPCC report, tipping point will happen in the early 2030s, which means we need to move fast. I think Antonio Guterres, in his speech at the IPCC report on climate change 2023, said we have to move at warp speed. And to move at warp speed, we need to rethink the way we have adopted technology in the past. This old S-curve and things like that, all that has to change. Right? And hopefully that necessity becomes the mother of invention. And the third mindset change must be that Mother Nature has to win in this whole journey. Not any individual stock market company, but Mother Nature has to win because if we truly believe it's an existential threat. So the silver bullet is really about mindset change.
On the ROI, the Mother Nature and time, moving at warp speed. Thanks, Dr. Sanjay. Now, so a recurring theme that also come up besides collaboration is acting now. And I want to come to Paolo and then Andrew for this question. Just give us an elaboration on what you guys are doing at Berge Bulk, and Fortescue Energy in terms of utilizing existing systems and fleets, or we're doing what kind of conversions that have really reaped benefits and results.
I think in Berge Bulk, we have designed our decarbonization journey and divided in 4 pillars. The number one is really relentless focus on improving efficiency. We have been baseline 2008, and it's certified, reducing our carbon intensity 46%, which, obviously we welcome very much what IMO has decided in the last MEPC meeting. But I think, we need to do more, and we need to do it faster. So, new paints, Mewis duct, propeller boss cap fins, everything that, are technologies that are really, really well known, use it and use it now. We are also testing new technologies. We are pretty much into wind propulsion. We have one vessel that is right now in the shipyard assembling 4 rigid wings, 37 meters long, 20 meters of cord, that by the end of the month, hopefully, we will all see sailing here in Singapore. And I think these are new technologies like flattened rotors. We are testing kites, air lubrications on our hull. We are hybridizing our fleet and being the first one in the industry, retrofitting 1.2 megawatt shaft generator, which is not a small piece of steel that you need to put and squeeze in the most difficult place on a vessel where the propeller shaft is. So all of this needs to be done, and we would have not been able to do it on our own without the support of class societies, and DNV has been a great support for Berge Bulk. Flag state authorities, our charterers to start with. We need to convince that their cargo is in safe and reliable hands when sailing with our vessel. So our charterers are definitely into the equation with us. So all of these things are extremely important. Our ambition is an ambition which is very, very strong. By 2025, we need to be carbon neutral. And we are also working very much on new fuels. We are working on biofuels, tested different types of them. We have been working on, and we're working on methanol. It's here, it's there. We have just heard it from Kenneth before. The processes, the technologies exist. Of course, we need to solve the equation, fuel availability, fuel prices. I think we need to make sure that the chicken and the egg will become twins and not one and the others before. And in this respect, we will move on there. And we will also move on with ammonia in the future. And carbon capturing, essential. By 2050, there will still be an important part of of fossil fuels. So what do we do with them? And I think we are both in capturing carbon on board of the vessel and in capturing carbon ashore. So in that respect also, we are really committed to carbon capture ashore. By 2026, Berge Bulk will plant 25 million trees. By end of last year, we were planting 9.6 million of mangrove trees to capture carbons around the globe. And we do it in all those areas where our customers are present and where our seafarers are present.
So very busy, definitely not resting on your laurels there, Berge Bulk. Thank you, Paolo. Andrew, your
And
strategies.
Great to hear that work from a leading shipper. And I think for ourselves, the number one thing that we've done is we've committed to the elimination of fossil fuels from our business by 2030 for our Scope 1 footprint on the planet. I think that's very important because that's triggered now how we behave. I think we heard Knut in the introductory speech was talking about many new buildings today have the renewable option. Without being too contentious for once, I'm very concerned about that because I think it's very easy for engine manufacturers to say this is a dual fuel engine, but it's methanol, when we know that there isn't enough methanol on the planet to supply those ships. So it's concerned us a lot. So we've been pushing very hard on the ammonia side of things. We believe that that is the truly green fuel, carbon-free fuel that we can produce. So I think in February this year, we became the world first to test ammonia in a marine engine in Perth. It's still being tested now. So we're learning about the emissions. Stage 2, later this year, we will conclude the first fuel transfers on a ship that we're converting here in Singapore to show that ammonia can also be used in a marine capacity as well on board a ship. Now, these elements are very, very important. We're not trying to be an engine manufacturer. We're trying to say it is possible to do these things now, because if we don't do this, if we can't call out the engine manufacturers and say, look, it is possible, and we're supported very well by class, you need to act now. What's going to happen is they're just going to sell engines which are going to burn methanol and fuel oil, and they will only burn fuel oil. So the solution is not by seeing new buildings today with the dual fuel option. That is not a solution. That is kicking something down the line. I think we all know now that it cannot be kicked down the line. But elsewhere in the group, what we're doing, we're today testing ammonia in our locomotives in the Salomon mines in Australia, and we're still pursuing our endeavours to seek to convert our very large ore carrier fleet later on this decade at the right time. So we're doing an awful lot. What we want to do is we want to persuade the likes of Berge Bulk to manage our Scope 3 emissions by getting them to be ready with their own technologies. We hope ammonia to join that journey with us so we can all reduce our not only Scope 1, but Scope 3 emissions as well.
So we know that by leveraging on some of the existing fleets and systems that we already have, we could achieve about 30 to 35% CO2 reduction by fully reaping the energy benefits and potential of what we already have in combination with some operational improvements. And I'm wondering from the likes of Dr. Sanjay or Kenneth, from your observation of the industry and you at the GCMD, what are the quick wins can industry players here capitalize on in the meantime? Dr. Sanjay, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think in the power sector, and we were going through the energy transition, energy efficiency was and still considered a renewable source of energy. Being energy efficient is just not about decarbonizing. It is actually good business sense because it reduces your OPEX, right? And I think that's important. I think it applies to shipping as well. And as we allow energy efficiency technology to seep in, and again, I go back to this whole ROI thing. People say, oh, I can't adopt it because it's too expensive. What is expensive? Expensive and from which perspective? From Mother Nature's perspective, she thinks it's cheap, right? So I think we need to think through. I think, and in that sense, I think energy efficiency is a very important lever. The other one that's in the near term is the biofuel area, because today's infrastructure can deploy biofuels, right? And it's a good way to start that whole process of weaning off fossil fuels as we wait for the green fuels to hit scale and available. So I think these two levers need to be played around very well. And if you slap on carbon capture on it, you can actually get down quite a bit in terms of your carbon emission. You know, it's a combination of all these three moving parts.
So shifting the focus to energy efficiency and then biofuels. So I'll come back to you on biofuels there. Kenneth, your thoughts?
Yeah. So I agree with Sanjay. Since in the past, Sanjay and I, we were pushing very hard on the electrification for hovercraft, and he was executive director of SMI. Efficiency is definitely an area that we want to do more. In terms of route planning, if you have optimized use of your assets, I think that's also a good use. And from where MPA comes, we are also advocating just in time. So what we have done is to get the various timing from everybody, from the port, from the harbor, pilotage, tugboat, from the bunker, everyone. If a ship calls on Singapore and can orchestrate the time, so 72 hours before you arrive, you actually estimate all the various time, and we make sure that all the activities are orchestrated. Then actually by the time the vessel comes, very little wastage, minimize the wastage, and then you get on with all your cargo operation, plus your bunkering, plus your ship supply, for your crew change. Then after that, you leave the port in the most efficient way. I think efficiency in terms of digitalization will be another quick win for everyone.
So efficiency in terms of...
Can I add something? Yeah, no, just to also add the fact that by adopting operational efficiencies, it will help alleviate the pressure on demand of carbon neutral fuels and also the price pressure, which will be, really key in the next years.
So is a resounding energy efficiency, focus on energy efficiency there. Thank you, Cristina and Kenneth and Sanjay. Alternative fuels, that's a big topic, right, in this maritime decarbonization. And according to the DNV's maritime forecast to 2050, shipping will require about 17 million tons of new fuels by 2030. And that accounts for about 30 to 40% of the global production volume by that time. So how is shipping going to secure this supply, given that we will have to compete with other transportation sectors, which will then also lead to uncertainty in supply and price fluctuations? So this is a time where I come to Kenneth, because you're from the government, regulatory body. How should Singapore secure the supply of future fuels that we'll need?
I think
Should it be
earlier-
regulated? Sorry, should supply be regulated also? That's another question.
Yeah, no, I think, when we talk about supply and demand, I think we have to act on both sides. So on the demand side, I think that is where, together with EMA, we started to call for this proposal for ammonia to be used for energy as well as bunkering. Because Singapore needs to start triggering and initiate this demand, right? And of course, with FFI and many of you will start to trigger that we need that fuel. Once that fuel is done, and then we can demonstrate that we can do it very safely and efficiently in Singapore, that builds up the confidence. And the supplier is also the supply side is also an area in which we are working with in terms of looking out where are the potential supply side and get them to come to Singapore, because Singapore is a major trading hub. So there's also this energy supplier can start with a trading desk and then come with shipping desk. And then if they start to do all this, then of course the fuel can come. So this is what, as a government, we could do both from the supply and the demand at the domestic level and at the IMO level to look at the various emission measures, controls, all the discussion about your bunker levy or whether it's a tax and all this. At the IMO level, how we could governize the various member countries to also come to a consensus on certain mechanism. So I think on both fronts, these are the areas that we are doing.
Paolo, how does that sound to you? Good?
Yeah, I think it's...
As someone who's a player in the industry.
This is the challenge we are having in front of us. It's not only a question of when the fuel will be available and at which price, but it's also the other very important challenge that we need to tackle immediately, and we are tackling it now, is competencies for new fuels. I mean, if we think that in merchant marine, the vast majority of the vessels are dry bulk carriers and then container vessels, those vessels historically have been low-handling technologies. So, and when I compare seafarer, those vessels versus seafarer or LNG, LPG carrier, the amount of knowledge and competencies is immense what we need to get. And without those competencies, doesn't really matter that the fuel is available because we will not be capable to handle on board the vessel. So safety and knowledge are of paramount importance, and it needs to proceed in parallel with understanding where those fuel will be available, how are we going to bunker them, what's the well-to-wake equation for carbon intensity of those fuels, because most likely they will be produced far away from Singapore, and they need, if there is a physical bunkering, that's what we are going to expect, they need to be transported here. How are we going to transport those fuels here? So all of that is where a ship owner, very traditional as Berge Bulk, is right now, in discussing with different players and potential future partners on how to get that equation solved and move on and make the right bets for the future and minimize the risk for those bets.
Dr. Sanjay, can you weigh in then on what do you think are the two most economically viable future fuels that the stakeholders in shipping and maritime should be looking at first?
The challenge is you've got to kind of multiply it by the volumetric energy density factor. So it's just not the dollar per ton, but how much work can that ton of fuel do for you? So if you look at it, the closest thing is biofuels, which you only have a 90%, it's 95% in terms of energy, right? But once you get into methanol, you need like 2.6 times the volume to get the same distance. You go to ammonia, you need 2.8 times. You go to hydrogen, you need 4.5 times, right? So it's changed. The equation changes, and it is just not about economic value. That's why this is what I'm saying. We have to start thinking of, if it's just cost, and we're trying to make money and save money, then don't worry about decarbonization. Stick to a fossil fuel. But if we're trying to decarbonize to save the world, then we need to have a different way we look at why are we burning this fuel, and what is that value. And I think the other thing, and the demand signals for the green supply chain has not been strong enough. Consumers must also demand for a green supply chain and are willing to share that cost of making that supply chain green. And I think that's where we all start working together. Collaboration is just not about the industry collaboration, but it's the entire human race collaboration to address this existential threat, right? And I think that's when you talk about price, because otherwise you'll just go around in circles. You'll never be at the right IRR, not the right ROI, and
Yeah, and it comes back to your first point about that mindset shift that needs to happen, right? And Cristina and Andrew, then, what necessary infrastructure has to be in place, to ensure that this, even if we had all these alternative fuels, it will actually contribute to the feasibility of maritime decarbonization. And I think we're also looking at refueling stations.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, infrastructure is one piece of the puzzle, right, of the whole fuel, because if you tackle the safety, but you are not able to reach to that, fuel, then it's nonsense, right? So, but there's already some infrastructure in place, right? And some of these electrofuels and biofuels, for example, can use the EMGO, bio-MGO, can use the existing fuel oil infrastructure. Some of the carbon neutral liquid methane, like bio-LNG or e-LNG, could use the existing LNG infrastructure, right? We have several ammonia carriers, ammonia terminals, and methanol terminals, right? So there's something in place, but obviously it needs to be scaled up and be in the correct places. And then,
Thanks, Cristina. Andrew?
Yeah, I think to add to that, obviously, for ammonia, which may be the ammonia carriers, may be one of the first hydrogen carriers to move molecules for the power sector. Of course, that doesn't need the bunkering infrastructure, so it's not facing that constraint. I think clearly ports like Singapore have a level of existing infrastructure to handle these multiple fuels, including potentially ammonia. I think what's going to change the industry significantly is the location of the production of the renewable fuels. Dr. Sanjay mentioned the volumeric challenges, and so it's more likely that many centers of these renewable fuels, ammonia, methanol, will set up in places of production. So I'm thinking of places like the Red Sea, Mediterranean, and so forth, which are on some of these green corridor routes. And I think these will develop as new bunkering hubs going forward, such that the product doesn't have to move to a bunkering hub. Singapore is quite close to Australia, so Australia not currently producing significant fuels. They will come to Singapore. So I think there'll be also a shift. I think the big question is going to be how governments accept floating storage as an accelerant or as an interim stopgap towards long-term, so land-based storage. Most countries are constrained in some way by land, and floating storage provides that option. I think the key to the adoption of the fuels is how quickly governments can accept the floating storage solution as a viable and safe solution for these new fuels.
Okay, so location, location, location. And if you're stationed here in Singapore, you know that we are obsessed about location. So it applies to the maritime sector too. We have a question from the audience that's related to this theme that we're discussing right now. So let's pull it up on the screen, please, for everyone to see. Will Singapore develop green ammonia and green hydrogen production facilities in here? Yeah, right here in Singapore. Kenneth?
I'll give you a try. And I think to produce these green ammonia and hydrogen, I think we have to look at what are the ingredients that you need to make this dish, right? And you need a lot of renewables. So when you talk about renewables, then the question is, does Singapore have enough renewables? Well, we have half, which is solar. But I always say, if anyone can come up with a technology to capture lightning, we will be good to produce. Because Singapore has, we are a lightning rod, right? We attract a lot of lightning. But otherwise, if we don't have this lightning energy, or maybe yet to come, then producing green hydrogen and green ammonia will be something of a challenge. And I think that is where we now then therefore have to look at elsewhere for carriers to bring such a fuel to Singapore. But we are not resting on our laurel. We continue to see what are the various renewable that we will have. Never say never. So one day, maybe the technology will mature.
Very optimistic. Yes, Dr. Sanjay.
Yeah, I think the Kenneth is right? So then the question for us in Singapore is, do we see nuclear as a green fuel? Because if nuclear is a green fuel, then we can have floating nuclear, small molten salt reactors or whatever it is to produce the green electrons, then you can get into that green production. But then, you need a mindset change to accept that nuclear is a green fuel, right? So there are opportunities, but at scale, I agree with Kenneth, there's no way. We're already a renewable shortage, right? For the building sector, the car sector, everyone wants green electrons. Maritime is going to be further down the packing order.
So speaking of nuclear, this is a really nice segue to our poll question to the audience. So we know that we need the right decarbonization technology to alleviate the need for new carbon fuel, low carbon fuels. So we would like you to key in your response to this question, please. Which decarbonization technology do you see as the most promising? I mean, there's nuclear propulsion there, but we also want to discuss with you guys here on the panel is that how is nuclear widely accepted by the public? Is that likely to change? And then we also want to talk about pink hydrogen. So let's have you just key in your responses. We have 5. This time around, there's multiple choice for you, so you don't have to key in 1, 2, or 3 word answers, but we have solid oxide fuel cells. Air lubrication systems doesn't seem to be as popular, okay. And then onboard CCS, nuclear propulsion. Okay, let's have more of you scan the QR code and input your answers. And then I want to get my panelists to chime in on the answers. It seems that onboard CCS is the most popular for now. Your thoughts? Anyone would like to chime in on the results that you're seeing right now? Is it within expectations, or any surprises there on the charts of how it's moving? Anyone? Paolo.
I might start here. I think it's well aligned with some of the thoughts we have in our company. And again, fossil fuels will be really still relevant by 2050. So we need to do something with fossil fuel. That's why carbon capturing is very important. And carbon capturing, as we have seen for a lot of other technology, has started already in land-based application, and they will be, once the technology matures, become smaller and more reliable and less bulky to be adopted easier on a vessel. So definitely supporting what the audience is telling us. Nuclear, as Berge Bulk, we have invested in companies developing thorium molten salt reactors. We might not really see a nuclear merchant vessel. I think the legislations and the rules and regulation will be extremely complex, but probably there will be a point to see what we call today the pink fuel becoming fully in the category of green fuels of the future.
Thank you, Paolo. Andrew, your thoughts on pink fuel?
I think putting pink fuel as a supplier to renewable energy, as Dr. Sanjay was mentioning, I think it's, I've always been a proponent on a personal basis for the use of nuclear. I think it's probably cut CO2 emissions by something like 30% than otherwise would have been for the last sort of 50 years. I think the challenge with nuclear is, number one, existing nuclear infrastructure is very, very old and decrepit. So anything new that comes in has to replace that. We know for the more traditional plants, there's a long approval process, a long design process, and it requires government subsidies. So what I see is that pink nuclear will compete directly with renewable energy. Renewable energy has overtaken in terms of growth compared to nuclear, which I think peaked in 2006. So what it stands to risk doing is to pulling resource away from renewable energy towards nuclear for a problem that may not be resolved until, say, 10, 15 years hence. And I think that's quite dangerous. I think there is also a little bit of a link between the nuclear lobby and the climate deniers, which I'm not going to talk about today. So generally, I think, yes, sure, develop your small-scale nuclear plans. I think ship nuclearization is very interesting, but some way off. But I would not want to see the pink debate eclipsing what we're trying to do on the renewable side, because I think it could be very dangerous. It will stop us acting today. We'll be under the false pretense that something is possible in the future. One thing is clear, that the fuels are available today. They can be manufactured today, whereas nuclear, it is still untested for these small-scale plans. So I think be very, very careful. I think it's misleading.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you still stand resolute for the focus to stay with renewable energy side. And Dr. Sanjay, perhaps you could give us an update on some of the onboard CCS projects that's happening on the GCMD now, given that we had 55 logins for onboard CCS.
Yeah, no, happy to. I mean, we started this journey almost within months of when we first got established in August 2021. We started talking to the industry about onboard carbon capture. We spent about 6 months evaluating whether GCMD would get involved, and in 2022, we made a conscious effort to start really deep diving and learning, all the intricacies of doing that. And we launched Project Remarkable, which is the one you're referring to on phase 1. And phase 1, when we did it about 15 months ago, when we started off, we really didn't know very much. And I must say, and we've been doing a tech scan recently, in fact, we just finished a white paper on this for the board, that so much has changed. In the last 12 months, the amount of technology solutions that emerged from nowhere that is making onboard carbon capture more of a reality today than it was 15 months ago when we started this journey. Thank God we had this gate process of doing phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So we're now, end of phase 1, we're thinking through what is the next step, because now that we have this new tech around, they're still early days, but they're very promising. So we're re-looking at the strategy. But you remember, our project on Remarkable was not just about onboard carbon capture. It was an end-to-end, right? Which means we need to close the loop. So you just don't capture it. We've got to offload it, and then we've got to sequester it or utilize it or close the loop on the CO2. So you literally fix the CO2 and you pull it out of the environment. And that's our entire project, just not on the onboard carbon capture. So it's looking good. We've learned a lot, and we hope to share all those learnings with the industry when we finish the report. But now the next stage, we're thinking of how we piece the whole ecosystem together to close the entire loop on carbon capture, because it is just not about onboard carbon capture. It is about offloading, it's about utilization and fixing or sequestration. We have to complete the chain to make sure that we decarbonize.
That's really promising. Promising to see that there have been like exponential improvements and findings just within 15 months. So we have much to look forward to. Thank you, Sanjay. And Cristina, given your remit, looking after Southeast Asia, Pacific, and India, how should ship owners or charterers place their bets in such a complex environment with choices?
Yeah, no, I think they, as I said, I think they need to make a strategy for their fleet, because they will not be able to have every vessel green one, right? But make a good and effective strategy. Do what you can do today. There are short-term actions like route optimization, vessel reduction, hull and propeller cleaning, right? And then look at your medium term and long term, like which onboard CCS could play a role in, even nuclear, right? And I'm surprised about the low score on their lubrication system, which, by the way, is already installing around 250 vessels, and it has quite a lot of potential. But I think it's also extremely important that we have is a measurement of real performance, because we have estimates, but as we need to keep working on how to get the real performance of the vessels.
Fair point. Thank you, Cristina. Gentlemen, just very quickly, when Cristina looked at the poor results on air lubrication systems, I saw you guys like wink at each other. I mean, what was that about?
I was not able to see it from the table. I would have commented before. I'm surprised, because air lubrication, to be honest, is the only technology which is not route dependent. You can use it on routes where there is lack of wind. You can still use it on routes where there is more wind. So, it's a very versatile technology. I have to say, there is still a lot to be done, and we have air lubrication in some of our vessels, and we are definitively developing the way of operating that technology. But it's a versatile technology, much more than wind,
So let's not poo-poo air lubrication systems just yet, guys.
Not yet.
And Kenneth, I just want to quickly get your thoughts before we wrap this question to go to the final one about nuclear possibility in Singapore. Your thoughts?
Yeah, for Singapore, actually, naval and submarines actually have been calling on Singapore too, which are nuclear powered. So I think we have developed some capability to handle such crafts and such ships. So I think, but it's always an ongoing learning process. But having a nuclear, say, reactor in Singapore, now that's another question. Yeah. It's like, should I put it in Ang Mo Kio or should I put in East Coast?
Floating.
Floating. Even if it's floating, should I put in the East Coast part, near the East Coast, or near to the West Coast part?
It's all about location.
Yeah, about location again, and I think there's also that social aspects that we have to be mindful and we want to make that decision. Yeah. But I think what Singapore is doing is to build up that capability. So in the National Research Foundation, they actually build up centers to look at nuclear safety, because regardless of when it's going to happen, right? It's when, right? It's not whether it happened, it's when it's going to happen. Then we must build up that capability to handle it safely. whether it is offshore, nearshore, or even onshore. I think that's important. For carbon capture, we always are watching it very carefully to see how, as Sanjay said, end-to-end, because we always understand the tank of fuel, one part, then you generate 3 parts of CO2. You can capture 1 part, but if you put the 3 parts onto your board, that means you have to sacrifice your space. So I think there's many of these aspects that I think technology, as they mature, we will have to watch on carefully. But otherwise, I think, yeah, air lubrication, those existing technology, please use them because this is not route dependent and digitalization, and we will try to advocate that during at the green and digital corridor so that different between port to port, if we could really harness this, calculate the emission reduction, and I think we can then show proof to the industry how this technology has helped the shipping lines.
Very well explained. Thank you, Kenneth. So I'm mindful of the time. We're going to close this panel now with one final question to each of you. We've discussed so much today. No more silver bullets. What's the one thing you think needs to happen to ensure that everything that was said actually comes to fruition in the next decade, right? This is called the Decade of Action for Maritime Decarbonization. Dr. Sanjay, let's start with you.
Paradigm shift, mindset change.
Paradigm shift, mindset change. Wow, thanks. I like that. Cristina?
Yes, that everyone has a strategy and installs some energy efficiency devices in their vessels.
Okay, so pick out your strategy, focus on energy efficiency. Andrew?
Like no more see now, more about can now, and the power of now.
Oh, don't see now. Okay, so see how.
See
can,
how.
Yeah,
No,
don't
no
see,
more, no
how.
more see how.
Can now.
Can
okay.
now.
Okay, I like
Power
that.
of
Yes, I'll remember that. Paolo?
Be open-minded, keep on working with the new players that are really coming in our industry that were not there a few years back, and you know, diversify the way we think for making a change.
Be open-minded and diversify. Thank you, Paolo. Kenneth?
Yeah, I think taking action, I think it's the team and the collaboration. I think that's important. Shipping is both small emitter plus also an enabler for new fuel. So I think Maritime stands a good opportunity to collaborate.